Ilya from not so sunny Zurich, but it was really nice Mountain View. And I'm here with Sebastian, founder of HOPR, and we're going to dive in and learn more about it. Do you want to introduce a little bit about yourself and then...
Yeah, sure. Thanks, first of all, for coming to not so sunny Zurich to talk about privacy here. Yeah, Sebastian, founder of HOPR. We're, as we say, changing data privacy for good. What we're doing specifically is a metadata private data relay network that provides data privacy on a transport layer. So bringing data from A to B.
Okay. Maybe let's dive into the problem first.
Yeah.
So kind of understand why do users and developers care about this?
Sure. So let's take, for example, we have a data exchange between Alejandro and Zoe, right? So we have our first protagonist, Alejandro. And for example, Alejandro might be using a MetaMask wallet, right? And what do we actually do when we submit, for example, Ethereum transactions, right? So we send it to somebody else, in this case to Zoe. And Zoe might be an RPC provider. And what is kind of interesting is that today, when these two exchange data, they also make to each other visible their IP address. So for example, in the case of a MetaMask user and an RPC provider, the RPC provider sees where you live, they can link your accounts and all sorts of other things. So we want to solve that. Now, interestingly, people sometimes say, hey, I get privacy by decentralized technologies by, for example, running my own node. But interestingly enough, running your own full node is not enough because you basically just have the IP address of that node, which becomes a synonym of your wallet's IP. So yeah, basically what people sometimes then do is you use a VPN, right? So in our case, maybe we have Ciao as a new actor in our model here. And, we just relay everything via Ciao. So far, so good. But I guess as we know, well, with VPNs, you're just trusting that guy now with everything, right? Your browsing history. And if they know what power you have when you submit crypto transactions, which they can now link, it's probably going to get even worse than VPNs already are.
Yeah, so much front running now. VPN extracted value.
VPN extracted value, I like that, exactly, yeah. So like what if these guys find out that, for example, your transactions which you're submitting, like for example, to estimate gas price, right? So typically people just submit this transaction, say, hey, tell me, what gas amount I should send. Typical example, you can front run the whole thing for NFTs, DeFi, whatever. Okay.
Well, if you have SSL messaging here, that will be harder to...
It will be harder, but interestingly, so many times only by looking at the packet size, you can infer a lot of information, right? Mm-hmm. And this is exactly what we mean by metadata, by how frequently, how big data packets, you can still infer a lot. So one thing that does better than just a VPN is Tor. And what Tor actually does is it introduces two additional nodes, right? So let's call this one here Betty. And then we have one other node over here. And that one is Ciao. No, Ciao, we already got in our story, too bad. So that one is Dimitro. And now what you can do in this story is basically, so all our 5 friends are acting together and you're relaying data packets from one to another. And by doing so, you're basically not really knowing where data came from, where it goes to, and who is exchanging data with who. So far, so good with Tor. Maybe let's dive into onion encryption, which is something that is quite typical for Tor here. So
I should mention that this is probably run by Russian Federation and this is by United States.
Exactly, for example, right? And that's actually kind of good, right? Because you want different actors which are ideally not colluding.
No
right?
exchange information.
No exchange of information. That's perfect, right? That's perfect. So effectively, what we would like to see is that there is a data packet which gets forwarded along the way, right? And this data packet is encrypted. But it's not just encrypted once, but it's and that's why it's called onion encrypted, multiple times, right? So we have multiple layers of encryption that are being passed around. So basically, when we have the first relayer in our chain, Alejandro, he is like encrypting this packet 4 times. Betty gets the packet, she peels off the outer layer of this encryption. That's why onion, right? And passes it on and so on, so that finally only Zoe can see the data that is actually being sent around. So that is on a high level what Tor is really doing.
And so when you're sending this, you actually need to know the full route to your destination.
Exactly. So in case of Tor, Tor is source rooted, right? So you select a path, and this path that Alejandro is choosing is typically like long living. So typically something like multiple minutes. So that's actually one of the weaknesses. So you can look at the packet, like let's say I'm the internet service provider of Alejandro and Zoe. I can link these. I can basically see exactly how big is the data packet here, how big is it over there, and link these two. And if I don't do that just for one packet, but take these long living route that is persisting, I can eventually, even with not so hard resources, find out what's going on. Good. So, well, not so good. That's a weakness of Tor.
Also, right? just to question, like Zoe presumably also should receive an encrypted message for Zoe. So
yes,
what Mitro is seeing is metadata about this.
Exactly. Yes. So basically, the rightmost packet, like it contains the actual payload, which is still encrypted, and Zoe takes off the last layer of encryption. Yeah. Good. Okay. So how do we get better than that? So one thing, as I mentioned, like this weakness of the trust assumption of Tor is that the first and the last node is not colluding, and it specifically is the thing that we are wanting to improve. And maybe one thing to mention, because we'll pick it up later on, is the economic sustainability of Tor. Tor has been around for longer than Bitcoin, but Tor hasn't been growing really for the past at least half a decade. So we see Tor has under 10K nodes, and Tor has, under 2,000 exit nodes. So this last one, which is of course a bit of a touchy one because it gets access to the wide internet. So, bringing economic incentives to that game is the second major difference here. So how does that work? What we do in a mixnet like HOPR is actually, there's not just a packet coming along this route here to Chow, but there's actually multiple other packets that are also being sent to Chow, and Chow is sending these data packets out also to other people. So what happens there is actually you receive a packet, you cache it for a short amount of time while you're also receiving other packets. You transform them so they look different between incoming and outgoing packets, so you cannot link them, and you mix them up and send them out in a different order. And this combination of like transformation, of mixing, and having this artificial delays is actually what brings significant better privacy than what you have at Tor, because only if you have like access to that machine do you know which packet corresponds to what. So what we call this global passive adversary, either your internet service provider or like the, 3-digit agency of your choice will not be able to find out which packet corresponds to which, and they cannot link incoming and outgoing traffic. Good. So that's the fundamentals of a mixnet. Let's actually then go to the second thing, which is the weakness of Tor, which we mentioned in the beginning, is this linkability by just observing, like not even caring about all that, but just mixing packets. If you observe here and you observe over there. So effectively, what we're doing in HOPR is we make packets look indistinguishable from one another. And how we do that is by basically either shrinking them or padding them all to the same size. And interestingly, it's not just about the packet itself, but also about the header. So the header gives away usually a whole lot about who you're communicating with and so on. Like in a worst case, you can just see to whom is this packet addressed.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that is being protected by using a packet format that's called Sphinx. It's used by the Bitcoin Lightning Network and by a bunch of other projects. So it's made for such mixed nets. And it's basically called Sphinx because we don't just have this onion encrypted payload in the packet, but we also have a header that has a bunch of information in here for relaying that packet. And we augment that in case of HOPR by also having like some payment information that we append to it. Now, the first step maybe to realize for what's going on here is we have like some key material here. So there's some alpha, a key material that is defined by the sender of the packet. And basically, this alpha is an offline Diffie-Hellman that Alejandro is doing with all these downstream nodes. So effectively, by knowing their pub key, Alejandro is choosing a secret, and this secret X, he does an elliptic curve multiplication times G times the base point here. And so that is like the immediate material, which is then multiplied with the pub keys of all these nodes, and thereby you establish a shared secret. And this master secret I mentioned because we'll get back to it many times. We will use it to derive all sorts of keys.
Mm-hmm.
Good. Now, so this is the first part of the information of this packet. And there's other stuff as, for example, you need some routing information, right? So that's this beta in here, which tells basically Betty, well, where do you send this thing and some other stuff. And finally, there's an integrity tag in here, which is just allowing you to make sure that nobody altered the packet while it was in transport.
Wait, but isn't routing information as part of the onion?
In this case, no. In this case, not, because the onion really is only the encrypted payload. And what is interesting is how do we protect this header such that you cannot in transport extract stuff from it? And actually, Sphinx does something pretty interesting here. So if we look at the header, this header contains information like when Alejandro formats the packet for all the downstream nodes, right? So they all need to be able to process this. So in a naive implementation, you could basically say, okay, well, Betty just pulls out her information and passes on the rest. But that exposes some metadata information in the header because you could just observe how the header shrinks and you know where you are in the relay chain. So what Sphinx actually does is it takes all these pieces of the header information for the individual nodes, and that is then blinded. So it is first blinded with a blinding factor that only Betty can derive. I mark it with this hatching here. So basically, only Betty is able to remove this hatching, right? So only Betty can remove that. Then there's a second layer, which can then only be removed by Chow. So that's everything from here downwards.
So in a way, it's still onion, because you
yes.
have each layer encrypts.
Exactly. It's not part of the payload, but it's following the exact same principle, exactly like you say. So basically, you repeat the same thing, right? So this first part can only be derived by Betty, the second by Chow, and so on.
Mm-hmm.
So we have a bunch more hatchings for each of the nodes that participate there. And now what Sphinx basically does is when Betty receives this packet, she removes this and she pads then in the end some kind of noise data, which is indistinguishable from actual information. And what that means is for us as outside observers, we can tell what's going on, right? So she would just remove this part here and append this other. So that are some of the pretty interesting, neat things that Sphinx is doing to protect metadata in the header. All right. Then I said the second kind of interesting thing of HOPR is that we want to bring in incentives. So what we want to do is that, Chow, for participating in here, is receiving a payment.
Mm-hmm.
But for doing that, we don't want to
reveal who's sending.
Exactly, right? So there's a bunch of things that could go wrong. So in a naive version, it's like, especially maybe Bitcoin, people say, hey, you can solve all of the world's problems with Bitcoin.
Lightning network, solve everything.
For example, right? But so one thing, like in a naive example, even like on-chain, right? So in a naive example, what we don't want is we do not want to see, okay, first, like, Alejandro is sending money to Betty. Betty is sending money to Chow. Chow is sending money to Dimitri, and Dimitri to Zoe, right? So that would
money to Excel even better.
Exactly. So that would reveal everything that's going on here. So that's bad. How do we hide it? By going L2, basically. So what we have at HOPR is a payment channel network. So Alejandro has a payment channel open to Betty, Betty to Chow, Chow to Dimitri, and so on. Interestingly, we do not have an incentivization between Dimitri and Zoe because we say, Zoe is part of a service provider who has an inherent interest to receive and send data. So maybe as a quick recap, what does that mean? It basically just means that you commit funds, which can then be released by the other party with off-chain information, which is being passed along. So effectively, Alejandro is staking some HOPR token in a payment channel towards Betty. Betty is staking HOPR tokens in a payment channel towards Chow. So if you want to think like ultra high level, it's a little bit like POIs where you stake money in order to secure a network. Just in our case, it's not an L1, right? We don't secure a blockchain here. This is used to incentivize packet information which are being sent around. Yes. And then after we have established these payment channels, they can be used for sending actual packets around. And one interesting thing is that basically Alejandro sends like a locked amount of money to Betty here. Mm-hmm. So it's locked up because like there's a free rider problem in a naive implementation here. So the free rider implementation, the free rider problem is, what if Betty just
send it back?
Exactly. She just says, hey, thank you, and off I go.
Mm-hmm.
So what we bring in here is to solve this free rider problem is basically a key sharing mechanism. So this money, let's say initially it's like 3 HOPR. Realistically, it's less, but just for, explaining this, Betty needs 2 pieces of information in order to unlock this payment. So basically, she needs 2 keys. The first key, she can derive herself. Mm-hmm. And the second key will be passed on to her. Maybe let's remove some of the arrows, otherwise it gets a bit messy. So the second part, the second key gets delivered by Chow to her. Mm-hmm. So this second key half here gets delivered, and those 2 together are giving her the information for how to release that payment off the payment channel. Cool. So let's maybe dive one layer deeper into what's actually happening here. So I mentioned that actually we have this key information out of the Sphinx format, so this alpha, which we then use to derive further keys. So we have a master secret, which is, it's not just this, but it's actually, we have an alpha 0, which is derived for Betty. Mm-hmm. We have an alpha 1, which is derived for Chow, and so on. And basically this alpha is, it shouldn't be the same. Because if it was always the same, what could happen is that maybe Dimitri down there is extracting some of that, learning about the alpha, and maybe Dimitro is colluding with one of these GPAs, bad guys who have network level overview and can de-anonymize some information from the network. So that's why these alphas are basically iteratively changing. So every one of them is calculating the alpha for the next party, which also then ensures that the path is being followed. Because if anybody else would forward this packet to somebody else, they wouldn't have access to the private key of that party, and therefore they could not modify the alpha. So what we have here is actually the secret that we're using here, I will call S1. And that is the one that Betty derived herself, right? So let's call it S1O. And the second key half that we get back from Chow, so Chow is basically sending this key half, is S2, and it's effectively an acknowledgement, right? So Betty is taking the packet, passing it to Chow, and Chow is, as an acknowledgement, coming back to us with this key half. Good. So, and what we then want to validate, because that is something that needs to be validated by our smart contract, is actually, are these values here legit, right? So we don't want Betty
to submit some false stuff.
Exactly, right. And it could be two things, right? It could be she made up this thing because she's not actually Betty, or it could be that, she made up
acknowledgement. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So how do we do that? Well, we do it by basically doing an elliptic curve multiplication. So again, we multiply this here with some base point. Again, it's a plus here. And effectively, this value is something that has been signed off by Alejandro. I'll get to that in a second in detail. But for now, so we have basically this secret value here, the sum of S own plus S acknowledgement, which Betty needs to provide to the smart contract. But now basically another thing could happen, right? So what could happen is here that she doesn't know if she got betrayed. So before she does the actual work, she wants to know, well, is this stuff actually legit? So what we actually have here, so we can basically just rewrite this equation here. So this is S own times G plus S2, the acknowledgement, times G. And this value we actually provide in the header ahead of time. And we call this value here actually a hint. And this hint is actually part of the beta, which we have up here. Now, what does this do? So we have this as own, which she can derive herself, and we have this value. From this together, she can validate if the payment information of these two keys. Exactly. That's exactly what we wanted to establish here. And she can do that before she get that stuff from the smart contract. Before she got it to Chow and check with the smart contract, hey, is this legit or not? And then everything is fine. Just a little nuance. Basically, we have this elliptic curve multiplication, which unfortunately you can't do in Ethereum. So there's just like this very relatively silly EC-verify. So you can kind of abuse EC-verify actually to do an elliptic curve multiplication, which is a bit weird, but yeah, you have to work with what you got. All right. So
let's maybe just kind of mechanically, right? So let's say I'm Alejandro, I'm just joining the network. So the first thing I do, I go to smart contract and I pretty much commit to lock some amount of funds with Betty. Yes. I explicitly on smart contract reveal that.
Correct.
I specifically to Betty.
Specifically to Betty, yeah.
Okay.
Why? Because we want to, of course, avoid double spends, right? Yes. So that's why if you would commit to anybody, maybe one of these anybody's is your friend, and you're just, extracting funds.
So if we have the smart contract, right? So Alejandro came in with, storing like, let's say 10 for Betty.
Yeah.
Now.
And a bunch of others, right? So probably he wants to open a bunch of other payment channels as well.
Right? So he also opened up with Chow.
Yeah.
There was, let's say, which one? And so then when they're actually constructing this message, they are kind of committing like to this. Well, they create a hint and then they putting in
this actually on a smart contract. None of this is so far stored on a smart contract.
No, I'm more thinking like this, like 3 HOPR, right? Mm-hmm. Like they're committing based on the route that they consider to take.
So initially, when you open your payment channel on a smart contract, you're committing something only on an individual edge base in this network. Mm-hmm. So you're committing only money to the edge of Alejandro to Betty, Alejandro to Chow, and so on.
But I'm saying, like, when I'm sending this message, I need to put some putting the amount of here.
Yes, right? This amount that you send is mm-hmm. committed to this edge at first, and then what happens is actually Betty will commit to forwarding funds to Chow. So what is actually happening is that Betty is sending again like a HOPR packet here, which contains in this case now 2 HOPR.
Yeah, so my question here, if I'm committing to 3, wouldn't that reveal that I have a 3 hops?
In that case, so in the current version of the protocol, it does reveal that, yes. So we're thinking about some numbers to obfuscate this number here, right? Mm-hmm. So you could like obfuscate it up or down. That is currently a version that is revealed, that's correct.
All right. Presumably you can have like some 0-no, like if this smart contract actually was a 0 pool, right?
Yeah.
Then you can just send a.
That is true, although we are trying to avoid that for now because like we're thinking about throughput here, right? So ideally we want this packet transmission to be fast. So that's why we're trying to avoid, I know zero knowledge stuff is like very hot and stuff, but
it's slow. It's
very slow, especially if we're thinking, you want to send like dozens of packets a second.
All right. So then you're still encrypting kind of with the full layer. So I'm as Alejandro, if I join this network, the first thing I need to do, I need to discover kind of as many nodes as possible.
Exactly.
In the network, right? And so are the nodes registered on the smart contract somehow?
So effectively, if you're thinking about it, who would you want to open a payment channel to? You would only want to open payment channels to other nodes who are already kind of committed to the smart contract by having payment channels themselves. So effectively, what you're doing is we are also using the smart contract as a discovery mechanism.
Okay.
So you're basically going there and saying, hey, what's your, who's there? And you do see the pub key there. Mm-hmm. And from that, to whom you can commit stuff.
All right. So we have a pub key, which is kind of their official pub key. And then I'm assuming they also registered their IP address.
Yep, that's correct. Actually, the IP address is not there, but we have a DHT for that. But you could as well just store it actually there.
Yeah,
that's totally possible.
So there's DHT IPs, but you can potentially just when you're registering.
Yep.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay, so then so I come in. I'm like, okay, here's some cool folks. Look up maybe the latency for this IP addresses. Find
exactly. We're doing a health check. So what we're doing is actually. We're trying to probe the network. So far, the current version, which we have, is quite simple. I'm probing it, mm-hmm. but we're thinking about some transitive trust or something that's a bit better to get a view.
That's a very interesting. Let's put a note on that. Just basic mechanics, right? So have pub key. I discovered some. I'm like, okay, I'll commit to these folks. I'm sending. So then I build a route, right? So how do I build a route?
Yeah. So basically, what you want to assure is basically you're the new guy. You open something to Betty, and if you want to build a route, you want to find out where does Betty have open payment channels to?
Yeah.
So you're basically consuming the topology of the graph. But the interesting thing is, remember when I mentioned initially that this last hop here is not incentivized? Mm-hmm. So it's basically not a path finding problem, but it's more path selection, because any sort of connection of these guys is possible because your last hop is going to be here disconnected of this graph because it's not incentivized.
You can go like this pretty much.
Exactly.
If you want, but
exactly. Yeah. We're assuming we're assuming that on the TCP/IP level they're like connectable to one another.
Mm-hmm. But that if they don't, like if Betty does, let's say you build a path, but the path is Betty to, for example, Metro, and they don't have a open,
not a valid path.
Not a valid path. So Betty would just drop it and
actually, you would as you do the path selection, like we basically implemented it, just a path selection. You wouldn't find that.
Yeah, but let's say somebody did send it, right?
Yeah. Then it would just like that thing is not funded, doesn't work, packet drops.
Okay. And similar, like it better receives some from someone who have not opened a channel.
Same thing. And actually another one, so it could be that a channel is like out of funds, right? So it could be that you have, not enough, if you only have one hopper left in the balance, but the packet costs 2, well, you drop the packet also.
Okay. So potentially, then kind of potentially the packets can get lost because of this.
Yep.
Because somebody somewhere didn't top it off.
Exactly. So it's basically it's kind of similar, as packets hop around the internet. If there's somebody pulled the plug somewhere, packets get lost, and you need to like retransmit and try a different route. Mm-hmm. So.
Okay. Then let's return back. Yeah. So I can generate this hint, which is for the next one in the route.
Actually, sorry, the hint gets created by the sender, by Alejandro.
That's what I mean. I in this case is sender.
Yeah.
And then so how is it generated such that child can actually send the acknowledgement?
Yeah. So basically the same thing which we have done here is repeating, right? So basically, this key derivation, which is being done by Chow, repeats, right? So Chow gets the packet. So Chow again has an alpha, which is their alpha.
Yeah.
So from that, he extracts this one. He gets this one from Dimitro. He gets this downstream thing, and compares it to a value which is signed off by the previous by the previous node. So what is actually happening here is that part of this payment information I just wrote Hopper here, but what is actually happening is we are also sending a signature. Mm-hmm. I, as Betty, am signing off on the funds that I'm willing to transfer to Chow, which is a signature actually over these values here. So over the hint, over the amount, and some other stuff that we can get to. And we're doing that because, and that's maybe the next problem, we don't want anybody here like to modify the amount, for example, right? So we want, in this case, Chow, to be able to only extract 2 Hopper and not an arbitrarily much higher amount. And since this amount differs, like depending where you are in the route and potentially, whoever sent it, this amount is being signed off by Betty. And then the smart contract is basically validating that this hint is matching something that has been signed off by the upstream node.
But how is this computed?
The hint is basically the S acknowledgement. So the S acknowledgement is not something that Betty knows, right? Betty knows.
So how does Chow calculate it? So for example, he calculated his, so he got the acknowledgement, and then he sends back after already calculating this. He can send acknowledgement.
Yes, exactly. So the packet goes from Betty to Chow.
I understood. So he already receives his like S3 ACK. Yeah. Right.
That he gets from Dimitro.
Yeah, so he gets from Dimitro. How does he send the S2 ACK?
So basically the packet gets formatted. The entire packet gets like transformed. Betty calculates the alpha for Chow and forwards the entire packet to Chow.
Yeah.
And then the first thing that Chow does before passing it on is get back with the S2 ACK to Betty. And Chow extracts this S2 ACK, again, by his alpha in a packet that he got from Betty, deriving the master secret, which was established with Alejandro, but nice enough, Chow doesn't know it was actually Alejandro. From that, he is basically doing a key expansion. And from this key expansion, he's getting the S2 ACK, which, he knows, and in that case, Alejandro knew already, to send the hint value in a header.
So I see. So I actually thought that S2 ACK actually contains in some way that actually fully delivered.
No, it's actually all derived from the packet. And that's kind of the nice thing if you're thinking about it on a high level, right? So the nice thing is that Betty will forward the packet to Chow. Chow will again check some stuff like, is this legit? And if yes, then get back, then send the acknowledgement. Exactly. So this is kind of neat in that this.
Why does Chow wants to send acknowledgement?
That's a really good question. What if Chow is like not such a nice person and not sending this stuff back? That is a problem, but in that case, Betty would just close the channel because they would just assume Chow is offline. So it's the same as if Chow, like from Betty's view, it's the same behavior as if Chow just dropped the packet. And in such a case, she would just close the channel and saying, you know what, like, I don't play with you anymore because you never get back to me. So I'm not in business with you anymore.
So even if like eventually like got charged for one of the messages, just close.
It depends. Like this will depend a little bit how we see this thing happening in action, right? So we will need to find out how bad is like a free rider and churn problem here, and saying, maybe once I forgive you, but if you do it like 3 times in a row, I'm just saying, you know what, cut it.
Okay. Is there a minimum, like let's say I want to be a Chow?
Yes.
Is there a minimum limits that you need to have?
No, not really. Well, actually, one thing that is the minimum is like for 3 hops, you need like 3 times the minimum amount of tokens that is required for 1 packet. It doesn't make sense to stake less, but that amount is super low. So there's virtually no minimum limit.
So I can register like 1 million of those.
You could, but there is basically a cost to that, right? Which is the on-chain transaction fee, and you block some capital. So yeah, but in principle, you could absolutely do it. Now, the interesting thing is let's consider that as an attack scenario, right? So let's consider you're launching 1 million nodes here, which are all symbols of one another, and kind of coming a bit to the trust assumption of HOPR, we are assuming that there's at least one honest and effectively mixing node. Now, if it's all you, I'm wrecked, right? So what do we do to mitigate that? Effectively, it's kind of hard, right? Because on the one hand, we want this to be a permissionless network. On the other hand, like this is a problem. So in the path selection that is implemented, you are literally defining who do I trust. Trust is something very subjective. So we make it like very easy for people to implement their own path selection strategies. The one that we have implemented so far is weighing the probability of selecting a node with the total stake that they have staked. So effectively, yes, you could launch 1 million nodes, but I would only select one of them once in a blue moon. So that's how we defend against that one.
Okay, so it is kind of proof of stake-ish. Right?
Yeah, it has some properties which are very similar to POS systems. Yep. Okay, there's actually some more problem that I think we haven't talked about. And that is the problem of, I don't want, if I'm in this relationship, right, between Betty and Chow, if I'm Chow, I don't want to be tricked into always losing payment information, right? So in just not winning something. And another thing that we're doing here is we're actually not settling this every single time. What we're doing is probabilistic payments. Because again, like in this scheme, in a naive implementation, if you have 100% win probability, you see, okay, Betty is claiming something on-chain, Chao is claiming something on-chain Dimitro. Let's assume this blockchain is like super fast and stuff and doesn't cost us anything. So
some blockchains like that are. Yeah.
Exactly. I have some in mind, which are also EVM compatible. So the thing that is kind of interesting is in such a setting, we really want to make sure that this can't be tricked. So what we do is probabilistically, you would win once every millionth payment only. You would receive a payout. So it's probabilistic. Now, if we make it probabilistic, it solves some issues. In A, it doesn't disclose the path to the general public by on-chain information. 2, we save a bunch of time and money because even the fastest blockchains are probably, not going to be fast enough for kind of packet relay networks. So it's kind of 2 birds, 1 stone. But what we want to make sure is that this probability can be tweaked. And it shouldn't be tweakable from 2 sides. Betty shouldn't trick Chao into Chao always losing. Chao should not trick Betty into always winning the payout. And what we do for the one side is basically on this smart contract that you have here, you are basically committing a pre-image. Mm-hmm. And this pre-image is not known to the issuer of this. We call them, by the way, tickets. So what you're issuing here is not a payment. Like payment is something you will receive. It's more like a lottery ticket, exactly. So when Betty is issuing a ticket for Chao, this probability is containing an element which is only known to Chao and not to Betty in order to not get tricked. So when Chao is actually redeeming a ticket, he will provide like the pre-image to the image which is stored on the smart contract, which is basically just a hash. And then the smart contract evaluates, well, was this really a win or not? And this is information which is not known to Betty. It can also not be cheated by Chao because they committed to it ahead of time. And that's how we avoid this.
So just practically speaking, like Betty just generates some number, right? And then Chao has a committed to a hash of number.
Yes.
Of the Chao number, this is Betty number. And so smart contract, like when Chao actually finds when the winning condition is like MB plus MC, modulo a million is 0 or something.
Yeah, it's similar to that, exactly. So the only thing is that this number is stored on a smart contract
so
per each channel.
For each channel. So but when he wins, he submits a ticket, then he rotates
exactly, he rotates it. Which also means, by the way, just to come back to what you said, when you join the network, you basically pre-compute a few of these hashes and commit this to the smart contract. And we don't need to
in each channel.
In each channel.
So you have like an A1 and A2.
Yeah. Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Well, shows that.
Yeah. And in that way, we can avoid that, the ticket gets tweaked. Good. Okay, we talked about the probabilistic payments and what it solves. We talked a little bit about path selection.
Right, so what if you just send exactly the same number all the time?
The number is not chosen by Betty. The number is what Chao committed to this.
The lottery ticket.
The lottery ticket is not actually a number that gets sent along there. What is happening there is actually, it only depends on the number that is here, along with a challenge which is sent along with the packet.
Yeah, so how's the challenge formed?
So the challenge is actually formed by the sender, which is Alejandro in this case. So Alejandro is providing the challenge for all downstream nodes, and then we combine this challenge with the hash that is only known to Chao, and therefore Chao cannot tweak it because Chao committed to it, and Betty doesn't know the pre-image.
But so I mean, Alejandro can just what if I just send the same challenge all the time?
What if you send the same challenge all the time? The winning probability includes the pre-image of this number here. So if you send the same number all the time, the randomness is influenced by what is logged here.
Yeah, but so let's say like this specific challenge does not hit anybody's, and so I just keep sending it. So
you keep sending it
unless they change this themselves, right?
Correct, but okay. So we have a replay protection that does not allow you to send this challenge multiple times. Okay. So basically, you cannot send
like
the same.
Nonce, pretty much. So this is like Alejandro's nonce, and then they just okay.
Good. Maybe one thing to talk about on the network overview is a little bit what is required for this to be private.
Mm-hmm.
So what is required for this to be private is that there's at least one honest node, so not colluding with any GPA who has overview of the other parts of the network or colluding with others as well, but also needs to be effectively mixing.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't help you, if you have a good guy.
Receive and send it,
Exactly. And you're the only one that utilizes this node. So what we're doing here is to launch this network, we are using something that's called cover traffic. And what cover traffic is kind of fake traffic that is indistinguishable from real traffic.
Mm-hmm.
And the question when you introduce such a mechanism in an incentivized network is a little bit, well,
who's paying?
Who's paying, and B, how do we incentivize it in a way that is kind of safe? So in the first version, what we're doing is, well, who is paying? We basically finance it from token inflation.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a little bit similar if you want to think by analogy of like block rewards, right?
Yeah.
So block rewards are basically like kicking off the network.
For empty blocks,
Exactly. So when Ethereum launched, right, they were just empty blocks, but still people would just, mine that stuff. Why? Because they got ETH. And this is kind of a similar concept here on the cover traffic. And in the first version, the interesting thing is not just as in a mining network where you just need to think about who pays for it, but also who sends it.
Mm-hmm.
So the first version that we're having built right now, which is naive, that's us. HOPR Association is like blasting out cover traffic in order to bootstrap the network.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what's the problem with that? The problem is that in theory, HOPR Association sees all these routes, right? So effectively, the cover traffic is meaningless if you assume that HOPR Association would be colluding with this network. So that's why we're looking in a V2, which is using a trusted compute setup, such as a trusted execution environment, or like some other multi-party computation schemes, which are allowing you to disperse this cover traffic in a fashion that you can not cheat. Again, if you send cover traffic all to yourself, that would suck, right? And that two is still providing significant traffic for all the participants in the network in order to have effective mixing of all the nodes and participants in this network.
And you need the execution environment because presumably it's going to be running on every of these nodes, but there's no way outside of execution environment, like a secure execution environment, to actually create random path which they cannot route to themselves.
So the cool thing, this is again, it's not built this is a bit speculative here, but the cool thing about a TE is also you have actual deniability of knowing which route your packet took, which is kind of cool, right? So you can effectively do the entire packet formatting and send it out to the first node. Sure, you need to send where you send it out to the first node, but afterwards you don't know where it goes, right? Because what you get out of the TE is basically just this box here, which is pre-assembled, but you can't make any use of that.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe one other thing are these numbers which we put here, right? So whenever you have token numbers in there, the question is what happens if token goes 10x or goes down minus 90%, right? Yeah, so that would be a bit bad, right? Because if this just gets too pricey for people to utilize, then yeah, it's just not useful anymore. So typically what we see in decentralized networks when we have such issues, again, by analogy, would be the block size, right? Mm-hmm. So, or like some fees, some on-chain fees that you have. You have a market model, right? So you have supply and demand, and somehow this system equilibrates itself. The problem is, in case of HOPR, we want to provide privacy. If you want to provide privacy and we see, somebody is sending like 1.11111 tokens and the other one is always sending like 2, you can pretty easily make out who was sending a packet if you observe their behavior. Yeah. So we cannot use the typical model that is used, for example, for gas prices of transactions. On the other hand, it needs to be dynamic. So what we're envisioning here is that there is some sort of a dynamic kind of voting system to adjust this price up or down. But this process must be slow. So it cannot happen like on seconds or minutes, but like on, weeks. Mm-hmm. Every couple of weeks, there is like this thing can be adjusted up or downwards in order to make sure that the utility of the network is not in danger. Basically, a badly behaving Betty extracting too much money and like sending out only one HOPR is actually mitigated by having that embedded in the header information. So actually, apart from like part of this beta, I mentioned that we have this hint in there already. Actually, also the challenge which you mentioned is in there. And what is also in there for every single one of them is an amount, which every single one of the downstream nodes is expected to receive. So to prevent anybody from manipulating it. But again, you can only read yours. So if we're looking again back at these hatchings and how information is hidden, you can only ever like read what is meant for you. So in the header, we have basically this trust anchor to say, okay, nobody was misbehaving before, and I will always extract the one. Like for example, if I'm left with less than one, like I wouldn't forward the packet, I would just drop it.
So how does, when you're submitting this right to the smart contract with the challenge and your number, how do you submit the amount? Because you're submitting the
amount,
the full amount that Betty sent, which is like part of it is. You only like the Alejandro assigned to you, the amount that's for Chao. Yeah. But this is full amount.
What is received there in the payment channel is the full amount of 2 HOPR, but this is something that has been signed off on by Betty. So Betty has provided a signature over this and plus some other values.
Wait, but this is probabilistic, right? Alejandro actually didn't pay Betty, so
So what could happen is that you're just damn unlucky, right? So what could happen is that Betty didn't actually receive a payment, but she gets to pay Chao.
Yeah,
that is true. That can happen, but over time that should average out. That's basically by equivalence, like the lucky Bitcoin miner with the USB miner was mining a block. Maybe one thing to highlight on this thing on a high level is this is a trade-off what we have in here. We talked about the delays in the beginning. We talked about discover traffic and like the route here. So one thing that is interesting is that there's a fundamental trade-off between strong anonymity, low bandwidth overhead, and low latency, right? Yeah. So if you want to have something which has, super high quality privacy, you would want each of these nodes to like cache the packet for a long time. Mm-hmm. And you would have like a super long relay chain, right? But what it means is you would have a lot of bandwidth overhead for the network, which you have to pay for. And the second one is it would take longer. So what we want to do here is to basically make this configurable for the sender Alejandro. Right? Mm-hmm. So Alejandro can choose how many hops he wants to send. Now, one funny thing is like, since if we looked at this whole setup, is in the Sphinx packet format, we need to define a maximum number of hops in the network. So otherwise, you could everybody sees what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
So effective.
We should have like fast packets and slow packets.
Exactly. So we're thinking exactly having two tiers, right? So one is like for maximum 3, and maybe one is for longer. But actually, if you look at the anonymity set, how it grows as you increase the root is actually like it's flattening out somewhere. Mm-hmm. And there's some analysis that have been done also there.
7 is plenty for sure.
Actually, like 3 is already pretty good. So that's also the reason apparently why Tor has a choice of 3 mm-hmm. and not something much more, because it just flattens out eventually and doesn't add much. But what it does add is, of course, trust in each individual one, right? So again, the anonymity set might not grow significantly, but what does change quite a bit is, the likelihood that you have one node at least in your chain, which is mm-hmm. honest. So it's just something that you unfortunately always have to consider, because when you use a network like HOPR, like people are going to say, well, like performance is poor.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. That's because of this very fundamental trade-off.
So what's your latency on each, like you said, they cache it for some period of time, they send it in different order. What's the latency?
Yeah, so we are actually trying that out right now. So right now, what we're doing is we're having a fixed delay of a few hundred milliseconds. I don't remember the exact number. But what is interesting is actually it shouldn't be just fixed. So there's, some research.
Yeah.
Exactly. There's some research going into that, saying that you should ideally have like some Poisson mm-hmm. distribution. Now the interesting thing with the Poisson distribution is, there's non-zero probability that's almost infinitely long. Now an infinitely long latency is pretty bad. So what that means is there's inherent packet loss in such a protocol if mm-hmm. you want proper anonymity. But again, that's something that is required because you want to have kind of deniability of what is going on. And another thing to add there is on this cover traffic front, which is something that we're thinking about, is not just sending this linear flow that we have here, but there's like some other research where people like
split it,
where people loop it back actually. Mm. So, and by doing that, by looping a small fraction of the packets back to you, you can observe what is going on in the network, and you say, hey, I receive fewer packets as I should receive per this distribution. Mm-hmm. So probably there's something nasty going on, like somebody's deliberately trying to censor me, for example. So that is something that you can do in such a free routing scheme as we have with HOPR. So you can build a lot of other mechanisms on top of it, which is just part of your path selection, right? So you use path selection however you wanted to in your application.
Got it. And then your kind of liveness is mostly depends on pretty much like peer-to-peer. But if peers is not responding, you're just dropping them, then kind of
exactly
they'll just lose all like people will just close the state channels.
Yeah,
and then you will see
exactly.
They kind of like slowly disappearing from the network.
Yeah, it's actually a pretty interesting design space that we have here with these incentives that we bring into such networks, because like you could, I'm not saying it's necessarily a great idea, but you could bring punishments, right? So if you have too high churn, churn really harms this network.
Yeah.
So
if you will close a lot of state channels at the same time.
Exactly. Or like if they were not online for long enough, or if downstream nodes didn't like make any revenue, like you can just punish it.
And it's all then becomes like some of the things that are too easy to game, and then like spinning out a bunch of channels and then dropping the I mean, there's definitely a lot more things to innovate here. Awesome. Well, thanks for walking me through this. Very interesting. When we're seeing this in production in browsers near you?
In browsers near you. So we are currently working on.
That's 2 months to be.
So we're currently working on stabilizing the infrastructure layer. So basically making this network stable for node operators. Actually, one thing that we didn't talk about, which is a big headache for us, we want to make this truly decentralized. So if you're using that from your home router, like from a laptop between your home router and me also, then they should still talk to one another. Having that in a decentralized fashion is something that's, not so easy.
Peer-to-peer connections.
So the whole NLT topic is a big one. Yeah. So we are actually right now having a testnet online that people can just play around with. And over the course of 2022, we want to bring overlay features that you have from, I would call it more, higher level protocols near you. So like TCP-like features. When we have TCP-like features, then you can build stuff like socket connections, and with that, off you go. But we'll need the course of 2022 to build these overlay features in so that you cannot just use it for trivial first applications that we're showing right now. So we have like this chat application, how you can, just send some stuff through it, but you want to get delivery guarantees. There's also another thing we didn't talk about, this return path, right? So how does Zoe send stuff back? So in Sphinx, it's again not something new. There's a very cool way of ensuring that you can, in a privacy-preserving fashion, send stuff back. So Zoe can send stuff back to Alejandro without knowing to whom she's actually sending stuff. So that's very, very cool. And yeah, that's the roadmap for the year.
Awesome. Sounds good. Well, thank you. Check out HOPR and see you for the next episode.
Thanks for having me here.